I didn't leave because I failed. I left the moment I realized success meant nothing in that building. Only ownership did. The day my manager looked me in the eye and said, "It doesn't matter who built it. It's company property now." Something in me went completely still. Not angry, not scared, just done. Because in that single sentence, I understood the truth of everything I had built in secret and everything they thought they had already stolen from me. I had been at Northbridge Logistics AI division for 6 years when everything started to shift. Quietly at first, like a system update no one bothers to read until it's already installed. My name is Ethan Walker, 32 years old, senior AI engineer. People at the company described me as reliable, low ego, dangerously focused. I wasn't the loudest in meetings, but I was usually the one whose code kept the entire system from collapsing at 2 a.m. when delivery routes across the Midwest started behaving like a broken compass. I'm 6'1", lean from too many skipped lunches, with tired hazel eyes that never quite matched the sharpness of my thinking. My dark brown hair is usually unstyled, falling slightly over my forehead. I don't dress to impress, just dark hoodies, plain shirts, nothing memorable. That's probably why I was so easy to overlook. It started on a Tuesday. That was when Victoria Hale arrived. Victoria Hale, newly appointed director of AI systems, was the kind of person who entered a room like it had been waiting for her permission to exist. Late 40s, impeccably tailored charcoal blazer, blonde hair pulled into a tight knot that looked more like discipline than style. She had sharp blue eyes that didn't blink enough, and a smile that never quite reached emotional honesty. People said she came from a major West Coast tech giant after a strategic disagreement. I later learned that usually meant she had survived internal politics by outmaneuvering everyone else. She called it alignment restructuring. We called it survival training. On her first day, she didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. She stood in front of the entire AI division in the glass conference room overlooking Seattle's gray skyline and said, "Efficiency without visibility is wasted effort." Then she smiled and began redrawing the entire organization chart on a digital screen like she was erasing people from memory. Across from me sat Maya Collins, 29, machine learning specialist. Maya had warm brown skin, tightly curled black hair tied in a loose bun, and expressive eyes that always looked like she had already predicted the outcome of any conversation. She was intelligent in a way that made people slightly uncomfortable. She noticed patterns others ignored. She leaned toward me during the meeting and whispered, "She's not restructuring us. She's absorbing us." Maya wasn't paranoid. She had been through a similar corporate takeover at her previous company where entire teams disappeared after efficiency upgrades. That experience had left her cautious, almost hyper-aware of corporate language shifts. Near the back of the room sat Leo Park, our 22-year-old intern. Leo was thin, awkward, with oversized glasses constantly slipping down his nose. He had a habit of biting his pen cap when nervous. He was brilliant in a raw, unrefined way, but lacked the experience to recognize what mattered. During Victoria's presentation, Leo accidentally connected his laptop to the shared display. For a brief second, a folder flashed across the main screen. Walker_AI_sandbox_pirately. No one reacted, except me. Because inside that folder was something I had spent 2 years building in silence. An AI logistics optimization engine rejected by management for being too complex for immediate business application. Victoria didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. That night, I stayed late, alone, watching the system logs of my private build run simulations that outperformed our official platform by 38%. I didn't build it for them anymore. I built it because they stopped listening. And now they were about to rebuild everything around people like Victoria, people who didn't create systems but reorganized ownership of them. And I already knew how that story usually ended. The following morning, the entire AI division received an email titled Transparency Initiative, effective immediately. Victoria Hale stood again in the glass conference room, arms crossed, watching us like a system administrator watching unauthorized processes. Her presence had already begun changing the atmosphere of the floor. People spoke less, worked slower, and checked their permissions more often than their code. She introduced a new internal platform called Cortex Hub, a centralized repository where every line of code, model, prototype, and even experimental note had to be uploaded in real time. If it's not visible, she said calmly, it doesn't exist within the company's ecosystem. Her tone was polite, but the meaning was absolute. I am Ethan Walker, still 32, still overlooked by most executives. I watched her speak with a kind of clinical confidence that reminded me of someone rearranging furniture in a house they did not build. My hands stayed still on the keyboard, but inside, I already understood what this really was. Not transparency, but ownership consolidation disguised as collaboration. Sitting 2 seats to my left was Ryan Keller, a 45-year-old systems architect with a broad build, receding gray hair, and a permanent crease between his eyebrows, as if he had spent too many years arguing with machines that didn't listen. Ryan used to be outspoken, but after a failed acquisition deal 3 years ago where his entire team was dissolved, he developed a habit of agreeing quickly in meetings. When Victoria finished speaking, he simply nodded without comment. Across the room, Maya Collins leaned toward me again. Today she looked more tense than before, her fingers tapping lightly on her tablet as she quietly navigated through internal documentation. Maya is 29, sharp-eyed, with tightly coiled hair and a posture that never fully relaxes. There is a calm intensity about her, shaped by a previous company collapse where engineers lost credit for years of research. "This isn't transparency," she whispered. "It's a data funnel. Everything we upload becomes theirs." She wasn't wrong. Later that afternoon, I tested Cortex Hub with a harmless commit from my sandbox project. Within minutes, the system flagged it as company-aligned innovation and automatically requested additional metadata, training sources, development timeline, and external dependencies. It wasn't asking for context. It was extracting it. Meanwhile, in the HR department, subtle changes were taking place. I met Clara Jennings, the HR compliance officer, a woman in her late 30s with neatly tied auburn hair, soft features, and the exhausted politeness of someone who had learned to survive bureaucracy rather than challenge it. She avoided eye contact when I passed her in the hallway. I noticed updated contract templates being quietly circulated, new clauses buried under legal language that extended company ownership claims over conceptually related intellectual outputs. Maya discovered something more concrete. She pulled me aside near the server room, her expression unusually serious. "They've already started retroactively tagging older repositories," she said. "They're rewriting attribution history." Her voice wasn't angry. It was controlled, like someone documenting evidence in real time. That evening, I stayed late again. I watched logs from my private AI engine while simultaneously monitoring Cortex Hub's ingestion patterns. Everything I uploaded, even harmless test outputs, was being indexed and cross-referenced. It felt less like collaboration and more like surveillance with polite branding. And for the first time, I understood the full strategy behind Victoria Hale's restructuring. She wasn't building a better system. She was building a legal architecture where innovation could be absorbed without conflict, where ownership was defined not by creation, but by visibility. and I had just placed my entire invisible world inside her machine. After Victoria's announcement about Cortex Hub, the atmosphere inside Northbridge Logistics AI division changed from tense to almost surgical. Conversations became shorter, meetings more structured, and everyone began speaking as if every sentence might later be used as evidence. I am Ethan Walker, still officially a senior AI engineer, but now operating like someone already halfway out the door. It was during a Thursday strategy sync that Victoria finally said it directly. She stood at the front of the room, hands resting lightly on the table, her expression calm but detached. "If anyone feels uncomfortable with the new transparency framework," she said, "you are free to pursue opportunities elsewhere. We value alignment more than attendance." The message was clear: compliance or departure. No one responded, but I had already made my decision. That night, I began what I called my quiet exit strategy. I created a separate encrypted archive on my personal machine, documenting every stage of my AI logistics engine, every experiment, failed model, optimization test, and simulation result. I wasn't just saving code, I was reconstructing the entire timeline of creation. Each file included timestamps, system environments, and external validation notes. It was not paranoia. It was architecture. At home, I live alone in a small apartment overlooking Lake Union. The space is minimal: a desk, 2 monitors, a bookshelf filled with technical papers, and a half-working espresso machine I never bothered to fix. It is here that I feel most in control. During one late session, Maya Collins called me. Her voice was lower than usual, cautious. "I think they're preparing something bigger," she said. Maya, 29, always precise in her observations, had begun spending more time inside internal audit logs. She had the kind of analytical mind that noticed when systems started behaving like narratives instead of tools. "They're mapping contribution chains backward. It's like they're preparing ownership reconstruction." While we spoke, another thread of the story unfolded inside the company. Sarah Kim, a corporate intellectual property attorney in her late 30s, was introduced to me through a mutual colleague. She was sharp-featured, with straight black hair pulled into a low professional knot, and a calm demeanor shaped by years of handling tech disputes that never made public headlines. When I met her briefly over a secure video call, she didn't ask if I was afraid. She asked what I had documented. That was when I knew she understood the situation better than most. Meanwhile, in the engineering department, Leo Park, the intern, 22, thin with oversized sweaters and nervous energy, accidentally sent an internal email meant for a senior architect. It contained a roadmap draft for what Victoria called Project Continuum, a long-term evolution of Cortex Hub. The email exposed timelines that clearly overlapped with systems I had built months earlier. Leo immediately tried to recall the message, but by then, it had already been opened by at least 6 people. The reaction inside the company was subtle but noticeable. Slack channels went quiet for a full 47 minutes. Then, activity resumed, but differently, more carefully. Ryan Keller, the systems architect, stopped by my desk that afternoon. Ryan is 45, tall and slightly hunched, with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes that suggest he has survived too many corporate transitions to believe in stability anymore. He didn't say much, just placed a printed copy of Leo's email on my desk and said, "You might want to keep your records tight." I already was. That night, I completed the first full version of my development ledger, an independent, unbroken history of everything I had built outside company scope. Every commit, every test, every private simulation was now accounted for. And for the first time since Victoria arrived, I felt something shifting. Not fear, but alignment. Because leaving wasn't escape anymore. It was preparation. And by now, I had stopped thinking of myself as just an employee of Northbridge Logistics AI division. I was something else entirely. an independent builder operating inside a system that believed it owned my time, but not my mind. During the day, I still attended meetings, responded to Victoria Hale's structured directives, and uploaded sanitized fragments of my work into Cortex Hub. But at night, I built the real system. Victoria had begun calling late-stage contributors into alignment reviews. One of them was Daniel Price, a 38-year-old data infrastructure engineer with a heavy build, shaved head, and a calm, almost monotone way of speaking. He used to be enthusiastic about optimization problems, but after 2 failed product cycles and a public restructuring, his personality flattened into compliance. He rarely disagreed with leadership anymore. When he saw my system logs during a shared debug session, he only said, "That's not what we approved," then looked away. What he didn't understand was that approval had stopped mattering to me. At home, my apartment had become a parallel lab. 2 external GPUs, a refurbished server rack I assembled myself, and a network of encrypted storage nodes running across leased cloud instances under pseudonymous accounts. I worked in cycles: simulation, failure correction, optimization, repeat. The AI logistics engine I had started years ago was no longer a prototype. It was evolving faster than anything Northbridge had in production. The breakthrough came on a rainy Sunday night. I ran a stress test simulating peak continental shipping loads across disrupted weather systems. My system adjusted routing in real time with adaptive redundancy layers I had never shown the company. The output was staggering. 41% improvement in delivery efficiency, 28% reduction in cost volatility, and predictive rerouting that preemptively avoided bottlenecks hours before they formed in the simulation environment. I sat back in silence. This wasn't incremental improvement. This was a different category of intelligence. Maya Collins became my only consistent point of contact inside the company. She was 29, sharp-eyed, with tightly coiled hair and a habit of writing notes on physical paper instead of digital logs. "If they trace activity patterns backward," she told me during a brief encrypted call, "your sandbox will eventually light up like a beacon." She had begun secretly copying system audit trails to an off-network storage server she controlled through a personal academic cloud account left over from her research days. "Why are you helping me?" I asked her once. "Because I've seen what happens when companies rewrite history," she replied simply. Meanwhile, inside Northbridge, a new presence entered the orbit of attention. Avery Cross, founder of a rising competitor startup called Vector Route Labs. Avery was in his early 40s, tall, sharply dressed, with silver-streaked hair and a restless energy that made him constantly shift posture during conversations. Unlike Victoria, he didn't hide ambition. He weaponized transparency. His company began quietly tracking industry performance anomalies, and somehow, he noticed inconsistencies in Northbridge's logistics output. It started with procurement delays, then routing inefficiencies, then sudden, unexplained improvements followed by regressions. To Avery, it looked like a system being partially replaced by something invisible. He instructed his analysts to monitor public-facing metrics more closely. At Northbridge, Victoria remained focused on consolidation. She rarely acknowledged individual engineers now, speaking only in system-level outcomes. But I noticed something subtle. She had begun referencing performance metrics that didn't match my sandbox projections. Someone, somewhere, was partially seeing what I had built. Ryan Keller noticed it too. One evening, he stopped by my workstation, his face more tired than usual. "Whatever you're doing," he said quietly, "it's bleeding into production analysis." Ryan, 45, once a respected systems architect, now moved through the company like someone avoiding eye contact with inevitability. He didn't ask me to stop. He just warned me. That night, Maya helped me migrate a full encrypted backup of my system to a private distributed server cluster. If they lock your access, she said, you still need to exist somewhere they can't rewrite. And for the first time, I realized something simple and irreversible. I wasn't just building an AI system anymore. I was building proof that I existed outside of theirs. By the time I decided to formalize everything, I was no longer just building a system. I was defending it. I am Ethan Walker, and the distinction mattered more than ever. The logs, simulations, and encrypted backups Maya and I had been maintaining were no longer just technical artifacts. They were legal ammunition. The meeting with Sarah Kim took place in a quiet downtown Seattle office that didn't belong to Northbridge or any corporate network. Sarah, a 39-year-old intellectual property attorney, had a composed presence that made every room feel smaller and more controlled. She wore a charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, and kept her black hair tied neatly in a low bun. Her voice was calm, almost surgical, shaped by years of dismantling corporate claims in courtrooms without raising her tone once. She reviewed everything without interruption: my development logs, timestamp chains, independent server records, even simulation outputs showing system evolution over time. At one point, she leaned back slightly and said, "You didn't just build this. You documented its life cycle better than most corporations document their own products." That was when she agreed to file. She called it a legal firewall strategy, a layered patent defense structure designed not only to protect invention ownership, but to preemptively block corporate reinterpretation of authorship. Each component of my AI system would be submitted as an independent provisional patent, tied together through chronological proof of development. Across the table, Maya Collins sat quietly. Maya, 29, with tightly curled hair pulled into a loose knot and sharp, observant eyes, had transitioned from colleague to witness. She brought a printed notebook of her own logs, external observations, system behavior notes, and communication timestamps. "I'm not just confirming his work," she said to Sarah. "I'm confirming the timeline of it being ignored, dismissed, and later replicated." Sarah nodded once. That was enough. Meanwhile, inside Northbridge Logistics AI division, the situation was evolving in parallel. Leo Park, the 22-year-old intern with oversized glasses and constant nervous energy, had begun noticing something unusual in internal repositories. Leo was not strategic or politically aware. He was simply curious, and that curiosity led him into restricted audit layers. One afternoon, he discovered a staging branch labeled Atlas_Core_Core_V3. When he traced its dependencies, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief. The architecture matched fragments of Ethan's sandbox system almost line by line. He sent a message to Maya first, then immediately regretted it. "I think they're building something on Ethan's system," he wrote. Within hours, internal discussions at Northbridge quietly shifted. No one said stolen or infringed. Instead, they used phrases like heritage architecture and legacy integration. Victoria Hale, ever composed, began referring to the upcoming product as Project Atlas during executive syncs. She described it as a natural evolution of existing internal intelligence frameworks. But I knew what it really was: a rebranding of my work. Ryan Keller, 45, appeared increasingly uneasy. He was a tall, slightly stooped systems architect with graying hair and a habit of rubbing his temples before speaking. During a late-night system review, he pulled me aside near the server floor. "They're moving faster than governance can track," he said quietly. "If Atlas goes live in its current state, attribution will become irrelevant." He didn't say theft, but he didn't need to. That same night, Sarah finalized the first wave of filings. Each patent submission included cryptographically verified timestamps, independent server hashes, and Maya's witness documentation. The goal wasn't just protection, it was legal immutability. If they launch now, Sarah said, sliding the documents into an encrypted submission queue, they don't just risk infringement, they trigger automatic interference classification. For the first time, I felt the structure shift beneath them. Not collapse, containment. And somewhere inside Northbridge, Leo sat staring at his screen, realizing he had just stepped into something much larger than an internship. By the time Project Atlas reached its launch day, I no longer needed to be inside Northbridge Logistics' AI division to understand what was happening inside it. Distance had become clarity. From my encrypted monitoring dashboard, I could see fragmented system outputs, deployment logs, and behavioral anomalies cascading through their staging environment like nervous system failure. Victoria Hale stood at the center of it all. She was 48, tall, immaculate in a structured white blazer that looked more like armor than clothing. Her blonde hair was tied back tighter than usual, and her expression carried the same controlled confidence she always wore in public. Except now it felt slightly forced, like someone holding a pose for too long under bright lights. Around her moved the executive team, rehearsed and polished. The event was held in a downtown Seattle conference hall filled with investors, press, and industry analysts. Large screens displayed looping simulations of Atlas optimizing global logistics routes in real time. Victoria called it adaptive intelligence at enterprise scale. From my remote terminal, I didn't intervene. I simply watched. Next to me in the monitoring channel, Maya Collins was active. Maya, 29, sharp-eyed and methodical, had shifted from internal engineer to quiet whistle layer. She had set up a controlled leak through a secure external contact in legal compliance. Not enough to trigger panic, she said in a message. Just enough to force questions. Maya's strategy was precision, not exposure, but doubt. Inside the company, Daniel Price, 38, a senior infrastructure engineer with a broad frame and a permanently fatigued expression, noticed the first inconsistencies during pre-launch stress tests. Daniel was pragmatic, not rebellious. Years of corporate restructuring had made him careful rather than curious. Still, even he couldn't ignore the fact that core routing modules were behaving like partially missing structures, functional but unstable under edge conditions. Did we inherit this code from a previous sandbox? He asked during a pre-launch sync. No one answered directly. Across the room, Clara Jennings, HR compliance officer in her late 30s with neat auburn hair and a habit of avoiding direct confrontation, quietly reviewed updated documentation packets. Her expression tightened as she noticed repeated references to legacy development chains that did not match official attribution logs. She said nothing, but began flagging files for post-event review. Leo Park, now visibly more anxious than before, stood near the technical support section during setup. The 22-year-old intern, thin, glasses slightly tilted, had stopped acting like an observer and started acting like someone witnessing a slow accident. He whispered to another junior engineer, "This doesn't feel like new code. It feels like something rebuilt from memory." Victoria took the stage at 10 a.m. sharp. Her voice was confident, practiced. Project Atlas is not just a product, she said. It is the next phase of intelligent logistics evolution. Applause followed, timed and rehearsed. Behind her, simulations began running live. From my remote feed, I saw the system initiate correctly. Then I saw the strain. Atlas was functioning, but inconsistently. Routing decisions lagged under unpredictable load conditions. Redundancy logic triggered in cycles that felt incomplete, like missing subroutines attempting to self-reconstruct. Maya sent one final message before going quiet. They're running on incomplete dependency layers. That was all she needed to say. Daniel noticed it too during live diagnostics. He leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "Why does this feel like half an architecture?" Victoria, however, continued speaking, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the instability building beneath her presentation. At that moment, I made a simple decision. I stayed out of it. Because Atlas wasn't failing yet. It was revealing itself. And somewhere inside Northbridge's system, people were beginning to understand that what they had launched wasn't a product they built. It was something they had borrowed without understanding its weight. I watched Project Atlas fail without ever stepping onto that stage. There was no dramatic explosion, no visible disaster, just a quiet unraveling of something that was never fully whole to begin with. From my secure monitoring interface, I saw the system begin its live demonstration in front of investors, executives, and media representatives gathered in the Seattle Convention Center. Victoria Hale stood at the podium, composed as always. She was 48, her posture rigid, her white blazer immaculate under the stage lights. Her expression carried practiced confidence, the kind built from years of convincing rooms that uncertainty was just another form of innovation. But beneath that surface, I noticed something different this time. Micropauses between her sentences, as if she was waiting for the system to confirm her words in real time. Beside her technical support station was Daniel Price, 38, broad-shouldered with thinning hair and a habit of clenching his jaw when systems behaved unpredictably. He had spent the last 48 hours trying to stabilize Atlas's routing layer, but what he didn't understand was that the missing logic wasn't a bug. It was foundational absence. The demo began smoothly. Visualizations lit up across the giant screen. Global shipment routes optimizing in real time, predictive adjustments flowing like clockwork. The audience responded with controlled applause. Investors leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Then the system reached a decision node it couldn't resolve. From my screen, I saw it instantly. A fallback condition that should have triggered adaptive routing simply didn't exist. The logic path collapsed into recursive loops, each attempting to reference a missing dependency layer that had been stripped during earlier restructuring. At the front row of the engineering team stood Leo Park, now visibly pale. Leo, 22, thin, glasses slightly fogged from nervous sweat, had been tasked with monitoring live system logs. Unlike others, he didn't have political awareness, only clarity. And what he saw terrified him. "This module, it's not complete," he said aloud during a live diagnostic channel that accidentally mirrored to a shared internal mic feed. His voice carried further than intended. A pause fell across the room. Daniel leaned toward the console, scanning rapidly. "Why are half the decision trees referencing empty functions?" he muttered. "This isn't degradation. This is missing architecture." On stage, Victoria continued speaking for a few more seconds before realizing the response delay. Her smile tightened. "We may be experiencing minor synchronization latency," she said smoothly, but her eyes had already shifted toward the technical team. Then the first visible failure appeared. A routing map froze mid-transition. Shipment paths disconnected. The predictive engine attempted recalibration, but instead of correction, it generated contradictions. The system began outputting conflicting optimization states simultaneously. From my remote system view, I didn't move. I simply observed the structure collapse under its own incomplete foundation. At the investor section, murmurs started. A man in a navy suit, Harold Benson, 55, senior venture partner at a major investment firm, tall, with a heavy build and a voice that rarely rose, stood up slowly. His expression wasn't emotional. It was evaluative. "We need an immediate technical audit," he said firmly. "This does not match the pre-briefed architecture." That statement shifted the room. Another investor followed, then another. Backstage, Daniel finally said what no one wanted to articulate. "This system is missing its core logic layer. It's not failing. It was never fully built." Leo, unable to contain himself, added quietly but clearly, "Parts of this code, I've seen it before, but not in this repo. It feels like something we inherited without documentation." That was the moment the narrative broke. Victoria turned slightly toward her engineers, her composure still intact, but now visibly constrained. "Stabilize it," she said, lower this time. Not a request, a command. But stabilization requires structure, and structure requires what they had removed. The system entered a controlled failure state. Not catastrophic, not dramatic, just irreversible fragmentation under sustained load. The audience didn't see disaster. They saw uncertainty. And in corporate environments, uncertainty is often more dangerous than failure itself. From my end, I logged out of the live feed. Because the collapse was no longer about me. It was about what happens when a system built on borrowed foundations is forced to stand on its own. And Atlas was finally learning it could not. I expected victory to feel louder than this. Instead, it arrived as paperwork, signatures, and silence. The legal settlement between Northbridge and my legal team finalized within days after Project Atlas collapsed. There were no public apologies, no dramatic press conference, just corrected documentation, revised attribution logs, and a formal acknowledgement that I was the original creator of the core logistics AI architecture behind Atlas. Inside Northbridge, the atmosphere shifted overnight. Meetings became shorter. Leadership stopped using words like evolution and started using words like transition risk. The system that once tried to absorb my work was now carefully separating itself from it. I was formally invited back, not as an employee, but as something new. Head of Applied Intelligence Lab, Independent Division. The office assigned to me was on a different floor from the old AI division. It was quieter, with fewer glass walls and more controlled access points. The first person I saw there was Dr. Helen Ward, a 52-year-old executive overseer assigned by the board to supervise restructuring. She was tall, sharp-featured, with short, silver-streaked hair and a posture that suggested she had spent her career managing corporate crises rather than avoiding them. Her tone was neutral when she spoke, but her eyes constantly measured risk. "You're not here to repeat the past," she said. "You're here to stabilize the future." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Maya Collins arrived later that week. Maya, 29, still carried the same quiet intensity, tight curls, analytical eyes, and a calm presence that made chaos around her seem slower. She had officially left the old division after internal audits confirmed irregular attribution patterns, and she was now appointed as head of technical architecture under my lab. When she walked into the new workspace, she didn't smile. She simply said, "We finally stopped pretending they understood what they were building." We immediately began reconstructing the system. Not Atlas, not Cortex Hub, but something new built from verified architecture only. No borrowed dependencies, no hidden layers. Everything transparent, everything owned. Meanwhile, the aftermath of Victoria Hale unfolded quietly. Victoria, 48, once the center of corporate authority, was no longer part of executive operations. She left Northbridge without a press statement, only an internal resignation note that circulated briefly before being archived. I saw her once afterward in the building lobby. Straight posture, white coat replaced by a plain dark jacket, hair still tightly bound. Her expression was unreadable, but not broken. More like someone recalculating their next move outside the system that had rejected them. She did not look at me. And I did not stop walking. Daniel Price, now reassigned to infrastructure stabilization, occasionally joined our technical reviews. He was 38, visibly more relaxed now that the political pressure had shifted elsewhere. His role became less about compliance and more about reconstruction. "Funny thing," he said during one session, "the system works better when nobody tries to own it too early." Leo Park, the intern who had once stumbled into the truth, was quietly offered a junior engineering position under Maya's supervision. He still looked nervous, but now it was the nervousness of someone learning responsibility instead of fearing consequences. Harold Benson and the investor board approved funding for the new lab within 2 weeks. Their condition was simple: full transparency, no executive interference, and direct reporting to the independent board. The first prototype of our rebuilt AI system ran successfully on the third night. No instability, no hidden dependencies, just clean, adaptive logic operating exactly as designed. I sat in front of the console with Maya beside me. For the first time in a long time, there was no sense of theft, no legal tension, no invisible war running underneath every line of code. Only creation. And this time, it belonged exactly where it was built. So tell me, who was really wrong here? Was it Victoria, for trying to control innovation before it slipped out of hand? Or was it me, for staying silent, building in the shadows, and letting everything collapse just to prove ownership? If Atlas had worked, would anyone even care who created it? Or does truth only matter when things break? And honestly, what would you have done in my place? Stay quiet? Or protect your work at any cost? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know where you stand. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.